Welcome to another edition of Preps Plus Extra. Hi, I'm Mark Stewart, prep editor of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Joining me this week is J.R. Ratcliffe, sports editor of Now Newspapers. Usually he's the one who has the signage on.
Not this week.
This week I've got the Preps Plus signage on, so we mix it up around here.
Looking very fashion forward for the end of the football season, I see, for the big stuff now, which comes after.
Yes, I approve my attire as we get further along into the season. So who knows what I'll wear next week.
Very good.
But yeah, I mean, again, time has flown by. We're in week 9. Friday night, early Saturday morning, the groupings will come out, and then Saturday, sometime late morning, early afternoon, or sometime around that time of day, we'll get the actual playoff pairings. But even before we get to the playoff pairings, this has kind of been a wild year. I mean, last week we had at least for us, we had another one of our number 1 teams fall. Germantown lost to Homestead. This week we had Greendale. I'll have to count how many number 1 teams we've had this year in the Journal-Sentinel area rankings, but it's been more than usual. And again, I think it shows the balance. I don't know if there is right now, if there's been a team out there that's shown itself to be, the dominant one.
No, right. The parity in Milwaukee area high school football is pretty much as good as it's ever been, and that's the storyline I think you take away here from the 2014 season. I mean, the Classic 8 Conference is the perfect example right now. If Catholic Memorial can beat Waukesha West, and what we've seen tells us that's perfectly possible, then there's going to be at least a 3-way tie for that title and maybe a 4-way tie. We talked about the Greater Metro a little bit. Marquette is the front runner, but there are a lot of teams that are kind of right there, same level, battling for second place. Falls can get a tie for first place this week with a win over Marquette. We've talked about the North Shore Conference, which has just 3 teams at the top: Cedarburg, Homestead, like you said, and Germantown. But then Whitefish Bay isn't bad either. They're a team that can sneak in there. They could beat Homestead this week for all we know. So there's just across the board, there seems to be just a ton of parity, and it's hard to pick, like you said. I guess Greendale, we're going to find out. I mean, they got to beat an undefeated South Milwaukee team this week to hold on to that number 1 ranking. South Milwaukee might be a little underrated because they haven't had that level of competition. So even in the Woodland, where things are sorted out pretty well, you could get a little bit of an upset there too.
Yeah, and I was going to say, you stole my question. I was going to ask you, I kind of put out there that Greendale was my number 1, and I don't know if you kind of hinted that Greendale might be if you had to pick.
Oh yeah, right now definitely. They're the number 1 on our push for the playoffs page, but there have been so many teams like we've had at number 1. I mean, Waukesha West you have to consider. South Milwaukee is still undefeated. I don't know if you think of them as the top team, but they're out there. Homestead is still a big, a great team that you have to look at. Arrowhead is getting good again too. They lost back-to-back close games without their quarterback. I mean, how good are they? They could just win their 3rd straight state title after taking tied for 1st or 2nd or 3rd in the conference. It's a situation where there's a lot of good teams. It's not just parity for parity's sake either. There are good teams out there kind of beating up on one another.
Yeah, and this speaking of Arrowhead, I'm going to be very interested to see what kind of seeding they get, because if you seed them too low, then all of a sudden there's going to be some team out there that won a conference title or something, and that's not a team you want to see in your first or second round, horizon of the playoffs. So that's going to be just, one squad I'm going to be kind of interested in. We touched on the North Shore, Germantown, which I still think has has a very talented team. But Homestead took it to them, kept their hopes of another North Shore Conference title alive. It would be 14 if they beat Whitefish Bay this week. But yeah, we caught up with Coach Keel and a couple of his players after the win. Let's hear what they had to say.
I think they learned that even down a couple scores, they can rally, they play hard, and good things happen when you play hard. Real pleased for our kids tonight.
I mean, I had the easy job. I just had to run through the holes. The offensive line made huge holes for us to run through. I mean, I really credit them. So, I mean, a big thanks to them. They really took the game.
It's really special. We're really happy that we have a chance to keep the tradition of Homestead High School and try to get another conference championship. We knew losing to Cedarburg, we might have lost it, but we just wanted to give us the opportunity to win it again.
So Homestead's victory over Germantown creates a 3-way tie between Homestead, Germantown, and Cedarburg heading into the final week of the season. Obviously, Homestead still has to beat Whitefish Bay to get a share. Cedarburg has an easy task because they have a bye because of the Nicolay forfeit. Germantown, I believe, plays Port. But right now you got 3 teams. They're all 1-1 against each other. If you're creating a pecking order, of those three teams, Cedarburg, Germantown, and Homestead, what order do you go?
I think right now, don't you say Cedarburg is the best one of the three because they are the ones that have gotten better over the course of the year? I mean, they really took it to Homestead. I mean, like we talked about, that game was closer than it looked on paper, but still, that was a really impressive win. And you look at back in the beginning of the season when they lost to Greendale on a 2-point conversion at the end, and Greendale 8-0, undefeated. That would have been a win for Cedarburg in week one. It was basically a coin flip, and it went the other way. And then you look at they lost to Germantown at the very beginning of the season. And Germantown, not to say they haven't gotten better, they're probably still just as good. In fact, I would give them the edge maybe over Homestead for number 2, even though I know Homestead just beat them. It was a close game, and I still think from what we've seen of Germantown, they've been very impressive. And I mean, Germantown and Homestead, I feel like if they played 10 times, it'd go 5-5. And I think this with Cedarburg, too, just knowing that they played so well against Homestead and that they're playing hot at the end of the year, I have to like their chances. And they're going to be rested for the playoffs, getting this week off. They can sort of take it easy and sort of ease into what comes next. I mean, I would not want to be a team that faces Cedarburg any time in the playoffs.
Right. You know, this week I kind of had, you know, in our area rankings, I kind of had, you know, this quandary of, in my thinking, because usually when Team A beats Team B, like Homestead beats Germantown in a head-to-head situation, you know, I'll always put the team that won that game ahead.
Higher, sure.
Yeah. This week I didn't, because I just had to look at all three of them, and I said, okay, how do I, you know, peg these teams? And right now I went with Germantown. Mm-hmm. I went with Germantown. I just thought, you know, you take, you know, their win over, you know, Cedarburg. Even though even though the score was probably deceiving, it was still an impressive, you know, win that night. And then, you know, for the most part, they you could almost say they had Homestead. They were up early.
Yeah.
And Homestead made a rally. So I just kind of thought, okay, if I took both games, maybe they played the best overall in those two contests against the other two. Then I went with Cedarburg. And then Homestead, you know, was a tough 3 choice, but that was just kind of the way I pegged them. We'll, you know, they'll all have a chance to prove us right or wrong,
right?
You know, coming up here. You know, we touched on in the final week of the season some big games. Obviously, we already hit on Homestead and Whitefish Bay, but we also have got in the city conference we've got Milwaukee Riverside. Milwaukee King, which is a game that, you know, I think everyone in that conference has sort of been pointing to and as kind of the, you know, real measuring stick for both those teams. Woodland, we touched on the Woodland Conference Championship.
That's right, Thursday night, Greendale, South Milwaukee.
Right. So where are you going to be heading out this week?
I will. I'll see Muskego-Mugwanago in the Classic 8. That's at Muskego. The winner could get a share of the league title. The loser sort of eliminated. I mean, the best thing they can do is finish behind 4 other teams, which seems crazy because those are very good teams. I think Catholic Memorial Waukesha West is a game you want to circle on your calendar because CMH and could easily beat West and create that crazy 4-way tie in the Classic 8 conference. Even some of the last week serves as kind of an interesting game for a lot of schools that are just trying to get into the playoffs. You look at a New Berlin-Eisenhower team that travels to Messmer Shorewood to try to get a 500 record and get playoff eligible. Greenfield plays Tosa West. Greenfield trying to get a winning record. Tosa West trying to get to 500. So one of those teams almost certainly will be in, although you look at the playoffs, the way it shakes out, it's possible that a couple 500 teams will get left out this year. Not many, and it's even possible that a couple losing teams get in, that all the 500 teams get in. It's kind of right on that border right now, and it's really hard to know if a team like even Kettle Moraine, and if you go to lakecountrynow.com and read my column, I kind of break down their chances. Kettle Moraine's going to finish at best 3-4 in conference, but they have a chance to get into the playoffs too. So there's a lot of scenarios, just a ton of scenarios that can play out here over the last in the last week of the season.
Right. And you touched on the Woodland. Milwaukee Pius is another team that's in that 2-3 situation where, you know, obviously they need to win to give themselves any chance this week. So it's going to be interesting stuff. And even next week is going to be even better because we'll be able to talk playoff pairings and kind of, you know, maybe throw some predictions out there. We'll see how easy the brackets look to predict before we make any guarantees that way. But that's going to wrap it up for this edition of Preps Plus Extra. For more Preps Plus action, you can watch me and Lance Allen every Sunday night on TMJ4. Take care.